During a family trip with my parents and sister, my daughter looked at me at breakfast and said loudly, "Why did Grandma call you a mistake?" Everyone went silent as my mom stared at her plate. I felt a lifetime of buried resentment come flooding in. Now I'm questioning my entire childhood, how I parent, and whether or not I can ever fully trust my mom again. It started over breakfast. The lodge's dining room smelled like buttered toast and coffee. Outside, the lake shimmered through the tall windows. Callie, my daughter, had just stabbed her pancake with extra syrup when she looked at me and said it. So casually. So innocently. "Mom, why did Grandma say you were a mistake?" I remember the clink of forks stopping midair. The soft jazz music in the background continued to play, awkwardly filling the silence. My dad cleared his throat and reached for his coffee. My sister, Marissa, stared down at her granola like it had suddenly become fascinating. And my mother. She didn't even lift her head. Just stared blankly at her plate, her face stone still. I blinked, trying to process what I'd just heard. I don't know how long I sat there before I mumbled something to Callie about finishing her juice and promised we'd talk later. But my mind wouldn't let it go. We were 4 days into a 5-day family trip to Lake Placid, me, my daughter Callie, my parents Joanne and Paul, and my older sister Marissa. I had planned this trip hoping it would help us reconnect. We hadn't vacationed as a family since before my divorce, and I was holding on to this naive hope that maybe getting out of town, breathing mountain air, and sharing a cabin would soften the rough edges we'd all been carrying for years. Instead, my daughter unknowingly peeled back a scar I thought I'd long buried. Callie and my mom had been watching a cooking show together the night before in the lodge's common area. I'd gone out for a short walk around the lake to clear my head. It was my first real moment alone in days. I'd come back to find them laughing over some chef's failed souffle and thought nothing of it. Now, I wondered what else had been said. That morning after breakfast, I walked with Callie around the lake trail. I gently asked her to tell me what Grandma had said. "She said she wasn't ready for you," she said, kicking a small pine cone. "That she cried when she found out she was having you. She said she thought she'd ruined her life." I asked her if that meant you were a mistake. She didn't say no. I couldn't breathe for a second. I'm 36 years old. I've had time to make peace with certain truths. My parents were young when they had me, Mom was 20, Dad was 22. I always knew I wasn't planned. But hearing it phrased that way, knowing that my daughter, my child, was told something that deeply personal and potentially damaging, it set something loose in me I hadn't even known was still waiting to be released. Later that night, after Callie had gone to bed and the others were scattered around the lodge, I found my mother sitting on the cabin's small screened-in porch, watching moths gather around the porch light. I sat next to her and said quietly, "Callie told me what you said last night." She didn't respond for a long time. Just stared out at the woods. Then, softly, she asked about when I had you. I didn't mean for it to come out like that. "You told her I ruined your life." "No," she said, quickly, too quickly. "I said I was scared. That I wasn't ready." "Same difference when you say it to a child," I said. "She's 8. She doesn't understand nuance. She hears that and thinks I was never supposed to exist." Silence again. Then finally, "You were a surprise. Not a mistake. But you told her you cried for weeks. That you weren't ready. That it changed everything." "It did," she said, her voice quieter. "It did change everything." And there it was. The truth, raw and unfiltered. The words she never said to me directly over the decades, but that I'd always felt in the subtle ways, how she praised Marissa's achievements but rarely acknowledged mine, how she seemed more invested in my sister's business career than in my divorce, how she had once called my love of writing a hobby even after I got published. Marissa was the golden child. Planned. Polished. Perfect. I was the storm. I remember being a child and feeling like an intruder in my own family. I remember my mother's short temper, the way she snapped over small messes or interruptions. I remember her sighing heavily every time I asked a question. I learned early how to not be a burden. How to keep quiet. How to be useful. I didn't realize how much I'd internalized it until I was raising Callie and caught myself snapping at her for being messy. That's when I started therapy. I thought I'd moved on. But now I was watching my daughter absorb the same message I'd spent years trying to undo in myself, that her mother was never wanted. I couldn't let that sit. My mother, to her credit, didn't argue. She looked ashamed. Maybe for the first time in my life, she looked truly remorseful. But there was no apology. Not yet. The rest of the trip was quiet. We walked, we hiked, we ate together, but the closeness I had hoped to rebuild was fractured. Callie still clung to Grandma, not fully understanding what had happened, but watching them together made my stomach twist. I didn't want to cut my mother off, but I didn't want to let this go, either. When we returned home to Albany, I sat down with Callie. I told her, gently but firmly, that sometimes adults say things they don't mean. That Grandma might have been scared when she had me, but that didn't mean she didn't love me. And that she, Callie, was very much wanted. That I had planned for her, hoped for her, dreamed of her. That I would always choose her. She nodded, gave me a long hug, and went off to draw pictures in her room. I haven't confronted my mother since that night on the porch. I haven't told her I need an apology, because I don't want a forced one. I want her to see what she did. I want her to understand how that one comment to an 8-year-old girl reopened 30 years of wounds. I also don't know where this leaves us. We talk on the phone, casually. Surface-level updates about weather and groceries. But I can feel the air shifting. Something is sitting between us now, an ugly truth, half expressed. I know I'll need to go deeper with her eventually. But I also know that I'm allowed to protect my daughter from the things that damaged me. I can't rewrite the past, but I can build a different future for Callie. That starts with being honest. And it may also mean holding space between myself and the woman who gave me life, but not always love. In the weeks that followed our return home, life tried its best to resume its usual rhythm, but something had shifted under the surface. I went back to work, sat through meetings, made dinner, and helped Callie with her math homework. But the echo of her question, "Why did Grandma say you were a mistake?" followed me like a quiet knock at the back of my mind. My mother and I exchanged a few texts, mostly about Callie. She sent a link to a book she thought Callie would like, and commented on a photo I posted of Callie in her soccer uniform. She was trying, in her own way, to smooth it over. But I didn't respond with much. I couldn't. I wasn't ready. I didn't tell her not to visit, but she didn't come. Marissa, surprisingly, checked in more than usual. We'd never been distant exactly, but we hadn't been close either. She lived in Brooklyn now, worked in design, and moved in a very different circle than I did. Still, she called one Thursday evening just after dinner and asked if I wanted to talk. "I've been thinking about what Callie said," she started. "And what Mom said. I'm sorry. I think I've ignored it for too long." "What do you mean?" I asked, trying not to let emotion creep into my voice. "I've always known Mom treated us differently," she said. "I didn't know what to do about it. I figured if I pointed it out, it would make things worse. For both of us." I stayed quiet. There wasn't anything to say that didn't already live in the space between us. "Did you ever hear her say anything like that about me?" I asked. "No," she replied, and I believed her. I heard her say she was proud of me, that she planned for me, and waited for the timing to be right. She even said she wanted a girl because she'd already had a trial run with you. I laughed, a short bitter sound. A trial run. I don't think she meant it the way it sounds, she added quickly. But she said it. Yeah. She did. It wasn't anger I felt then. Not even hurt, really. It was more like a dull weight, familiar and unshakable. I realized I had spent my entire childhood trying to earn something I was never going to get. And I had built an entire adult life trying not to repeat that mistake with Callie. And that was the problem. Even if my mother never apologized, even if she never recognized what she'd said and done, I couldn't afford to leave that legacy behind in me. I didn't want Callie to grow up watching me walk on eggshells around my own mother. I didn't want her to internalize the idea that some people's love comes only when you perform well enough, behave the right way, say the right things. I needed to do something different. So I made an appointment with my therapist, Rachel. When I sat down on her couch the following week, I told her everything: the trip, the comment, the conversation on the porch, Callie's confusion. Rachel listened quietly, then leaned forward and said, "What would healing look like for you?" I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I wasn't sure I knew. "I think I want acknowledgement," I finally said. "And for her to stop doing this thing where she rewrites history." Rachel nodded. "You can't make her change, Sasha. But you can ask for clarity. You can state what you need." "I don't even know if I want a relationship anymore," I admitted. "Is that terrible?" "No," she said firmly. "It's human. You're not obligated to maintain a connection with someone who continually hurts you, even if they're family. Especially if they're family." That stayed with me. Still, I didn't make any decisions right away. I wanted to let the dust settle a bit. I also wanted to give Callie room to make her own observations. Kids are smart, and I didn't want to shape her perspective through mine. I just wanted her to feel safe, loved, and wanted, always. One afternoon, a couple weeks later, Callie came home from school and asked if she could draw a family tree for a school project. I helped her lay it out on the dining table. She wrote her name at the bottom, then mine above it. Then she drew 2 branches, one for my parents, one for Martin's. She hesitated before writing Grandma Joanne. "Are we mad at her?" she asked. That question hit me harder than I expected. "No," I said slowly. "We're not mad. But sometimes grown-ups say things they shouldn't. And sometimes we have to take space to think about how we feel." "Is she still your mom?" "Yes," I said. "She's still my mom. That doesn't change. But I get to choose how close I want to be with her." Callie nodded, seemingly satisfied, and went back to coloring. But I was left staring at that family tree, thinking about the complicated roots it was built on. That weekend, I decided to write my mom a letter. Not a dramatic one, not a confrontation. Just a letter where I told her the truth, that what she said hurt me, that it hurt Callie, and that I needed her to understand why. I told her how long I'd felt different, lesser. How I always sensed she regretted having me, even if she tried to cover it with polite gestures. I told her I didn't need her to fix the past, but I did need honesty if we were ever going to move forward. It took me 3 tries to finish it. I mailed the final version. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. Finally, I got a call. It was her. She didn't mention the letter at first. She asked about Callie's new soccer cleats. About how my work was going. Small talk. Then, just before we hung up, she said, "I got your letter." I waited. "I didn't realize how much I'd hurt you," she said. I thought. "I thought I was doing my best." "You probably were," I said. "But your best hurt me." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I really am. It wasn't everything. But it was something." After the call ended, I sat alone in the living room for a long time. The sun was beginning to lower through the west-facing window, casting that deep orange light across the hardwood floor. The kind of light that makes everything feel heavier, like the end of something. Her apology had been brief. Careful. But it was the first real acknowledgement I'd ever gotten from her that something had been wrong. It didn't undo what had been done, but for the first time, I felt like I wasn't crazy. That I hadn't imagined the imbalance. All those years of feeling second to Marissa, of being picked apart, dismissed, and quietly held at arm's length, those things were real. And she had finally said the words, "I'm sorry." Still, I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't rush to call her back. I didn't bring Callie over for a visit. I let the apology sit where it landed, like a letter slipped under a door that hadn't yet been opened. About a week later, Marissa came up to Albany for the weekend. She had a meeting in town and asked if she could stay with me instead of getting a hotel. Normally, I might have hesitated. We weren't the kind of sisters who shared pajamas and wine on the couch, but something about this season of unraveling made me want to try. I told her yes. She arrived Friday night with a bottle of Pinot and a bag of fancy granola for Callie. We sat on the back porch after Callie went to bed, wrapped in blankets and drinking wine from mismatched mugs. "You okay?" she asked eventually. "I don't know," I said. I got the apology. But it's like, I don't know what to do now. Marissa nodded. It's weird when someone finally sees what you've been feeling all along. It kind of flips everything on its head. She said she didn't realize she hurt me, I said. But how could she not? It was so obvious. Marissa was quiet for a beat. Then she said, maybe it was obvious to us. But she spent her whole life pretending she was the kind of mom she wanted to be. Admitting she hurt you means admitting that she wasn't. I hadn't thought about it that way before. But it made sense. She kept trying to be this perfect woman, this idea of a good mother from the outside. But inside the house, she wasn't nurturing. She was exhausted. Cold, sometimes. She snapped a lot. She checked out emotionally. Yeah, I said quietly. And it wasn't until I had Callie that I really saw it. I'm not a perfect mom either. I lose my patience. I let her eat toaster waffles for dinner, but I never want her to feel like she's a burden. You've broken the pattern, Marissa said, not with ceremony, just matter of fact. That's the best thing you could have done. I thought about that all weekend. On Sunday, after Marissa left, I found myself standing in front of the box I'd kept at the back of my closet for years. It was filled with old journals, college notebooks, and photos. One of those clutter boxes you move from place to place but never really open. I hadn't touched it since I moved into this apartment 3 years ago. Inside, I found an old spiral notebook I used to write in during high school. Mostly bad poetry and stream of consciousness ramblings. But near the back, I found something that made me sit down on the floor. A list titled, Ways to Keep Mom from Yelling. Keep your room clean, don't ask too many questions, do your homework early, don't sing in the house, be helpful before she asks, don't tell her you're sad, don't cry in front of her. I read it over twice. Then a third time. I'd forgotten that version of myself. That girl who tried to be small, silent, acceptable. Who learned to mask her feelings because love felt conditional. And that's when it really hit me, what I was trying to protect Callie from. Not just from my mother's occasional thoughtless words, but from this entire inheritance of quiet suppression. I didn't want my daughter writing lists like that. I didn't want her shaping herself around someone else's approval just to avoid disapproval. That week, I reached out to Rachel, my therapist, again. I brought the list with me. This, I said, placing the notebook on her table, is what I grew up with. I don't want to pass it down. But I don't know how to set boundaries with someone who's now trying to be better, even though she still makes excuses. Rachel studied the page for a moment. You can accept her apology without reopening all the doors, she said. Boundaries don't require hostility. They just require consistency. You can let her have a relationship with Callie, but only if you feel safe. Only if Callie feels safe. I want her to have a grandmother, I said. But not at the expense of feeling invisible. Then trust yourself to be the filter, she said. You know what to watch for. You've lived it. And I did. I knew the signs, the minimizing, the guilt-tripping, the little emotional sleights of hand that made you feel crazy for having needs. So when my mom called the following Friday to ask if she could visit that weekend and take Callie for ice cream, I didn't say no. But I didn't say yes right away either. I'd like that, I told her, but I think I need to come along, too. Just to make sure everything feels okay. She didn't push back. She just said, "All right." It was something. A small step. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe, cautiously, the beginning of something else. The following Sunday, my mother arrived just after lunch. Callie ran to the door when she heard the knock, excitement bubbling in her voice. I opened it and found Mom standing there with a small bouquet of daisies and a nervous smile. "For you," she said, handing me the flowers. I took them silently and stepped aside to let her in. We went to a nearby cafe that had a little ice cream stand out front and a few shaded benches under a row of old maple trees. The day was warm, the kind of early summer heat that made everything feel a little slower, a little softer. Callie got chocolate with sprinkles. My mother ordered butter pecan. I got a coffee and sat at the far end of the bench while the two of them chatted about school and cartoons. I watched them carefully, not like I was waiting for her to mess up, but like I needed proof this moment was real. That she was trying. Then Callie said, casually, "Do you remember that show we watched at the cabin, Grandma? The one where the cake sank in the middle?" My mother froze for a second, and I knew exactly what she was remembering. She smiled, but it was a little too careful. "Yes, I remember that." Callie looked at her innocently. "That's when you said Mommy was a mistake." The words hit the air like a dart thrown too hard. My mother's smile faltered. She glanced at me, eyes wide. I said nothing. She turned back to Callie. "Honey, that was a really poor choice of words." "I didn't mean that." "You said you cried when you had her," Callie said, licking her cone. "Was that because you didn't want her?" I watched the panic settle in her eyes, and for a moment I felt a flicker of cruel satisfaction. But I said nothing. I wanted to see what she'd do. She took a deep breath and said, "I was very young, and I didn't know how to be a good mom yet." "That wasn't your mommy's fault. That was mine. She didn't deserve the way I treated her." Callie nodded. "Okay," she said simply, and went back to her sprinkles. It wasn't for me, I knew. The apology wasn't really for me, because that's not how my mother operates. It was for Callie, because she still wanted to look good in her granddaughter's eyes. But I let it stand. I didn't need more words. I had already made up my mind. That night, after Callie went to bed, I logged into my laptop and opened up a long dormant Google document years ago. Back in grad school, I'd started writing a memoir. It was half-hearted then, just pieces of essays about growing up as the overlooked daughter, the mistake, the emotional cast-off. I never finished it. I never thought I'd have the guts. Now I did. Over the next few months, I wrote like someone trying to excavate her own past before it disappeared. I wrote about the lists I made as a kid, about learning to shrink myself, about the day I realized I was raising my daughter with the gentleness I never received. I included the Lake Placid trip, the porch confession, the ice cream moment. I changed names, of course. But the truth was all mine. By the time fall came, I had a full manuscript. And I didn't stop there. I started submitting essays, snippets of chapters, short stories based on real moments. A parenting blog picked one up. Then a digital magazine. A few months later, a small press emailed me asking if I'd consider a full-length publication. When I signed the book deal, I cried in my car outside Callie's school. Not because of the money, though it helped, not even because of the career shift it hinted at, but because I had taken something ugly and made it into something useful. I had told the truth. And I didn't need anyone's permission to do it. I waited until the final edits were in before I told my mother. We were on the phone, just a casual check-in, and I said, "I wrote a book." "Oh, really?" she said, sounding surprised but trying to sound supportive. "It's about growing up. About the way certain things stick with you when you're a child. The stuff people don't think matters, but shapes everything." There was silence on the other end. "It's personal," I added. "And it's going to be published." She finally said, "Is it about me?" "I changed names," I said. "But you'll recognize the truth." You always said I was too sensitive. Turns out that sensitivity paid off. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight. You're really going to let everyone read that? I already have, I said. People need to know they're not alone. That not all families are safe places. That even moms with smiling Christmas cards can cause lasting harm. More silence. Then, a low, bitter laugh. Well, I guess I can't stop you. No, I said calmly. You can't. That was my revenge. Not cruelty. Not cutting her off entirely. Not screaming matches or guilt-laden battles. Just the truth. Told loudly. Repeated. Published. And when the book came out, and people messaged me to say I thought I was the only one, I knew I had done the right thing. I had taken what she tried to bury in shame and turned it into something honest and strong. She never publicly acknowledged the book. Never posted about it, never congratulated me. But I know she read it. Marissa told me she had a copy in her nightstand. Sometimes silence is its own confession. Callie's now 9. She reads a lot. Writes little stories of her own. She once told me she wants to write a book one day, too. You should, I told her. Tell the truth. Always. And when she smiled and nodded, I knew something had shifted for good. The cycle ends here. No more inherited silence. No more performing for love. Just the truth. Out in the open. That's enough.